You have already seen 2 videos on this channel about the worst wedding nights in history. However, with so many arranged marriages in monarchies, some of them started very well, with a wedding night unlike any other. Since you asked for it, we have listed 5 splendid wedding nights. We start the list with Princess Isabel's wedding night with Gaston of Orléans. Gaston de Orléans arrived in Rio de Janeiro on September 2, 1864. He arrived with his cousin, Louis Auguste, both of whom had been sent from France to marry the daughters of Peter II. At first, the Count was not very fond of Princess Isabel's looks, but on September 4th, Peter decided that Gaston of Orléans would marry Elizabeth. The latter did not reject the proposal. The next day, the emperor told his eldest daughter that Gaston of Orléans had preferred her as a bride. Elizabeth was soon interested in Gaston, but the boy was about to marry because of his family's interests, not because of any personal preference. Even so, he enjoyed the social activities with the princess, which made the idea of marrying her more appealing. However, Isabel and Gaston increasingly enjoyed each other's company, as did Auguste and Leopoldina. The wedding took place on October 15th. With the celebration, the princess and her husband left that same day for Petropolis, where they would spend their 2-week honeymoon. It is hard to believe that the young woman, who had been brought up in seclusion, was now alone after the wedding with a boy she had only known for 6 weeks, and knew nothing about his body or intimacy. Now she would be required to serve this man, and to prioritize his interests by bearing children, as these were the main justification for both marriage and sexual relations. Fortunately, everything went well. The evening was wonderful for both. Isabel quickly fell in love with her husband. After the 2-week honeymoon, the newlyweds returned to Rio de Janeiro for the wedding balls and festivities. Gaston attempted to help his wife in political matters, which her father would not let her do. He recommended her to read books and took her to public offices. He wanted his wife to be well prepared for the upcoming role. One reason that made the princess dedicate herself intensely to politics was the growing rivalries between Brazil and Paraguay. Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon were married for almost 24 years. Even before that, they had known each other for almost a decade. The decision to marry her was one of Henry's first acts as monarchs in 1509. Catherine arrived in England in late 1501 to marry Arthur Tudor, Henry's brother. But the marriage lasted only a short time, as Arthur fell ill and died. The widowed princess was put aside by Henry VII. He did not want to let her go back to Spain, but he also did not know what to do with his daughter-in-law. Catherine was left in utter neglect in England, waiting for what would be done with her. She waited almost 7 years until Henry VII died, and Henry VIII announced that he would marry her. Catherine and Henry were married on June 11, 1509. Unlike the time when he married Anne of Cleves, with one of history's worst wedding nights, Henry VIII was at his peak, being considered one of the most handsome men in Christendom. He was tall, almost 1.90 meters tall, long-legged, athletic, and well-built. In short, he was the perfect husband for any high-ranking woman. Catherine was also regarded as very beautiful. The wedding ceremony was quite private, without much pageantry. After the wedding celebration and banquet, Catherine was taken to the room where the consummation would take place. Nobody knows what happened inside the 4 walls, but all that followed the next day was a smiling man and a smiling woman who had a perfectly happy union. Henry VII even told close friends that he was delighted to have found a virgin wife. For the first 10 or 15 years of their marriage, Henry and Catherine's relationship seemed to have been a happy one. But after 24 years of marriage, Henry did his utmost to get an annulment. Around 1657, Louis XIV, reaching the age of 19, was old enough to marry. It can be argued that he was the most brilliant catch in Europe. And, that being true, the only bride who could match him in his lofty stature was his cousin's sister, the Infanta Maria Teresa of Spain. This was the marriage for which Louis XIV's mother, Anne of Austria, had fervently prayed since they were both in the cradle almost at the same time. However, the obstacle for this to occur was the war between France and Spain. On November the 7th, 1659, France and Spain signed the Treaty of the Pyrenees, where the French won several contested territories, and the 30-year war was ended. To seal the peace once and for all, Louis would marry Maria Theresa. The cousins had known each other. Within the Spanish court, there was a general preference for Maria Theresa to marry Louis. The young Spanish princess had great esteem for her aunt. According to European royal tradition, 2 marriages were to take place, one by proxy and one de facto. The first one took place on June 3, 1660, within the Spanish borders, while the second was to take place on June 9th. Immediately after the wedding feast, the king suggested to his wife that they retire to their chambers. The whole ritual was completed, and Louis's mother drew the curtains over the bed. The wedding night was a complete success, unlike most wedding nights in royal history. One story claims that Maria Theresa took the wedding night opportunity to make the king swear never to leave her and to sleep every night by her side. The king actually kept his promise and ended up spending every night in his wife's bed. In the morning, he would go on to the clothing ceremony, leaving Maria Theresa for that longer and sluggish sleep. When it came to lovemaking, Maria Theresa made it clear that she was very happy with the spouse she had chosen. Louis admired the genuine passion that his wife felt for him, but he was a first-class womanizer. After a year, he would ditch his wife to pick up a piece of tail in Versailles. John of Aragon was born in Seville in 1478. He was the only male child of the Catholic kings, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. John's birth contributed to cementing Isabella's position as a sovereign, since she had given birth to a legitimate male heir. Isabel was a very attentive mother for such a hands-on queen. John, being her only son, had a special place in her heart, and she referred to him affectionately as "my angel," even when he was getting berated by her. As heir to the throne, Elizabeth and Ferdinand paid special attention to John's education. He was being excellently groomed to reign, but everything changed when the young prince got married. 17-year-old Margaret of Austria married John on April 3, 1497, in Burgos Cathedral. All of Elizabeth's children had a passion-filled nature. Although it was a political alliance, it was also a profoundly amorous marriage. John said that his wife was the goddess Venus herself. On their wedding night, the couple spent days in the room that had been prepared for their consummation. John requested that no one disturb them. The servants left food and water at the entrance of the room so that they would not be bothered. It appears that the amount of time they spent in bed made the court physicians uneasy about the prince's health. He was even afraid of how much he carnally desired his wife, but his confessor assured him that it was natural. The Princess of Asturias was easy to love. He was fun and had a sharp sense of humor. On October the 4th, 1497, a messenger went to John's parents and informed them that their son was gravely ill in Salamanca. John eventually died that day, aged only 19. Interestingly, the cause of death claimed at the time was possibly tuberculosis, but it was rumored that John had died from excessive sexual exertion. When Queen Victoria inherited the British throne in 1837, only weeks after her 18th birthday, and after a long string of male monarchs, she was welcomed as the symbol of a new era in the country. Naturally, there was soon speculation as to who her future husband would be. The consort's choice was almost always dicey. The man would have the upper hand, eager to outwit his wife. But Victoria knew the right choice. She went for her cousin, Albert. The consort for the Queen of England was first and foremost a political decision, not the spur of a young woman hopelessly in love. It was only after Albert's death that Queen Victoria built up this idea of choosing out of love. The wedding took place on February the 11th, 1840, in St. James Chapel. Early on, the relationship between the two was plagued by several conflicts and differences of opinion. But with time, the couple built a solid and unbreakable relationship, so much so that Albert never cheated on his wife. In an interesting fact, Queen Victoria kept her memoirs in her diaries since she was a little girl. She obviously couldn't ignore her impressions about her wedding night. The Queen wrote in her diary, "At 9:40 p.m., we went to bed. Of course, a bed. For me to lie beside him, in his arms, on his dear bosom, and to be called by endearing words, which I have never heard addressed to me before. It was a bliss beyond imagination. It was the happiest day of my life." Indeed, the lady who describes her wedding night so romantically is Queen Victoria, who ruled the British Empire from 1837 to 1901. Apparently, it was pretty good stuff, and the Queen liked the thing. They had 9 children. The relationship came to an end with Albert's premature death on December the 14th, 1861. The Queen dressed in black in mourning for the rest of her life.